Peace in our human family. Volume and unity. Divine light shining individually. Collectively transforming community. Peace in our human family.
One love, one growth, as above, so below. Feel the pain in my soul, the red pill dissolved. Organized, no matter the cost. Politicians start wars, they don't fight, they sit the poor. And nothing lasts forever as long as we stay together. Give hell to the masses, watch the unity rapture. This is for the kids and the culture. It's one love, one growth, one light, light warriors.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Jabbar VS podcast again. And today we have a special guest podcast hosts who are also doctors. And we're going to talk about COVID response and all types of things with COVID in this country, the United States. So I'll let them introduce themselves first and tell me what kind of doctor you are. There's so many.
You go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Sigmund. I'm a psychiatrist / child and adolescent psychiatrist. And I'm living in Boston.
And I'm Fidel. I'm an anesthesiologist, currently doing a fellowship, which is just a subspecialty year in acute pain and regional anesthesia. So I'll be done with that in the summer, and I live in Pennsylvania.
Okay, awesome. And you have a podcast that is called that went into the back. That's supposed to go in the front. There we go. Marxist and medicine. I love the name. This is dope. So everybody that already listens to me, they should already know exactly what's about to go down here. We're gonna give the real. Talk me up. And they were telling me about how I had this crazy doctor on, guys. I like to always be transparent. That doesn't even have his license anymore. And there was a lot of things that he was saying that was inconsistent. And there was some things that he said that was cool with like farmer and stuff like that. But we're going to get into what exactly is the right direction with dealing with this type of thing, because I feel like myself in general, I get caught up with just the daily news of what is heard 24/7, especially what's happening with Fauci now and stuff like that. But it's also a bigger nuance to understand instead of getting distracted with what capitalists are doing and how they are controlling the narrative of this vascular disease. Did that sound smart? I said vascular disease, right? Is that?
It's just all the poison coursing through our veins of society. All those atherosclerotic plaques of capitalism popping off into our brains and stroking out.
What is? I don't know what you just said.
It's all the bad stuff. I was just going with the metaphor.
Damn. All right. So clearly, I went to only public school. So what we're going to do is the first thing. What do you guys take on what is happening right now? Just for starters, like let's just look at what's happening right now. We're already over 750,000 casualties. What do you think? Do you think the United States is Biden and them, are they doing better, or is there still a lot of issues that they are not really covering?
I would say the only thing I think Biden is doing better is acknowledging that that COVID is real, and not, cultivating this hysteria of, how much should we care about this? Is it actually real? Is the vaccine worth getting? I mean, when Trump was in office, he was, pandering to his base, saying like, well, I got the vaccine, but you don't have to if you don't want to, like that kind of
After
thing.
being booed at a rally.
Literally, yeah, getting booed at a rally, be like, oh, actually, like if you don't want the vaccine, then don't. Like, okay, that's not super inspiring from the leader of the, quote unquote free world. So the only thing Biden's really doing that's better, I would say, is acknowledging that we should like take it seriously. and that's about the least that you can do. Yeah, he's doing some of these mandates, which, I get the, oh, my freedom people, the libertarians out there who might, be a little upset at this. But if you're going to end a global pandemic, you gotta use some, I'm going to say it, authoritarian measures. Okay. Because guess what? Society is formulated around authoritarian measures. It just depends who that authoritarianism benefits. And right now, authoritarianism benefits capital. It benefits the ruling class. It benefits the status quo. It benefits the owners of society. So if we're going to sit around and be like, we can't use authority, we can't exercise power because that makes us just as bad as them, you're going to sit around for a long time hoping that things get better, because your oppressors are never going to help you in any capacity, basically. So the response right now is still dangerously lacking. The pandemic is still raging. There's no trust in government for good reasons, which I think we'll get into later.
Yep.
And at this point, I hear people say like, oh, well, back when the pandemic, was raging, back when things were bad, it's like things are still bad. The only reason things are a little better now is because we have gotten to a certain capacity of vaccinated people. But think of how much better off we could be if people actually place trust in each other, in society, and in our government. And none of those things exist in the United States right now.
Yeah. And I think it's like almost like two different realities, right? Like where I think where I'm living, fully vaccinated people rates like are reaching like 70%. So like getting pretty close to herd immunity. And that's also the case in a lot of the New England states. Especially if you look at, say, example of like New Hampshire or Maine, where they really weren't hit very hard by the initial pandemic, like that looks drastically different from, say, like Florida or a lot of other states where your vaccination rates are still kind of in like the 50s, maybe 60%, and you're still having a lot of people get sick. And they were definitely hit like pretty hard, especially in the major population centers in the first wave of the pandemic. And the difference between the Biden and the Trump administration is just like the culture war thing, right? Like the good guys, quote unquote, are in charge. They're all wearing blue. They're all like wearing little pins that say I got vaccinated, just like I voted. But like the substantial response to the vaccine isn't really any different. Like we don't have any rent relief. We haven't forgiven medical debt for like the hundreds of thousands of people who survived COVID, but like are now, facing bankruptcy. Like we have still just like both Trump and Biden administrations have just like kind of greased the wheels of capital just so like that can function, while putting all the burden of like dealing with this, worldwide pandemic onto individual people with like no support from the government.
So with healthcare, so you're saying that basically it's more of a burden just on the healthcare part. We don't have to get into the whole economic housing and all that stuff like that. That's also a part of it, but we're talking about medical right now. So with health insurance, has that's a very strong burden, right? Because a lot of people aren't covered, and now they're doing co-pays and whatever they have to do just to get care, and that was just a very lax response, right? Between that as well too.
I mean, like even if you're paying, I think the average monthly premium in this country is like $400 or $500 for an individual, even higher for families, and that's like before you even go see a doctor, right? Like that's what you just pay like straight off the top. And to see a doctor, if you're lucky enough to have a family doctor and you go to urgent care, maybe it's $40. If you go to the ED, it's going to be $200, or maybe even like a co-insurance where you're paying a percentage of like your total bill, which can be thousands of dollars.
Right.
And so like when you already have people who can barely afford like the situation that they're in, I think like half of Americans couldn't afford like a $400 emergency.
Yeah, like and that's actual fact. A lot of people try to say that. I don't think that's true, but the people that are saying that are well off making over $50,000 a year, so they don't see that.
Those are people who are like guilty and don't and want to, like cover their eyes. And if they
Right.
cover their eyes, that means what's real is not in front of them. It's
Right.
basically regression to childhood, more or less. I'm not the child psychiatrist, of course, but I think Sigmund will back me up on that.
Yeah, you're an honorary one. We hung on.
Thank you. Yeah, so like health insurance before the pandemic was am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yeah, you can curse on this podcast.
Fucking atrocious. That's what
There you
health
go.
insurance has been and was before COVID. If you live in the United States, here's the scheme. Okay, if you can afford it at least. So you have to pay a monthly premium, which, like Sigmund said, for the average like single person, $400, $500 a month. Okay, if you're making even let's say $15, quote minimum wage, it's not actually.
Mm-hmm.
Federal minimum wage is $7.25, which is a slap in the face. And like, how is that even still possible in 2021? But that's another discussion.
Right.
So you're talking $400 a month just for a health insurance premium. Okay. When you have to go pick up a medication, you're going to pay a copay. And if it's an expensive one, and like let's say Lyrica for diabetic neuropathy, you're probably going to pay at least $50 or $100. If you take Wellbutrin for depression, you're going to pay like $60 maybe for a copay when you go pick it up from the pharmacy. When you go to the doctor, there's a copay potentially to see a specialist, especially. If you have to go get lab work, if you have to go have imaging done, there's a copay for that. Not only that, when you actually, enter the hospital, when you have these costs, these healthcare costs, there's a deductible that you're on the hook for up to, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 before the insurance company starts paying anything. So all of this leads to the question which Americans are asking, which is quite valid. What's the fucking point of paying a premium if I have to pay all this other stuff on top of that?
Right.
Why would I pay a monthly price and then all this stuff out of pocket on top of it? And the reasoning is, or the reason for that is, health insurance companies are ripping us off. They serve no purpose. They're purely a middleman that cuts off the top and pockets the money. They serve absolutely no purpose, and they get between patients and doctors. That was before the pandemic, right? This all existed prior. It's only worse now, only getting worse now. You want to talk about not just COVID, people with long COVID, people with neurological symptoms, vascular issues after the fact, after getting COVID and surviving, other chronic illnesses that ensue afterward. I mean,
people who had strokes, like because of being in the ICU with COVID, and now all the neurological sequelae of that. So like even just like indirect effects.
Can we talk about that for a second? And then coinciding on how care is doing with that. If you guys know any information on that, like what's the side effects that have been known through COVID after surviving COVID?
So I think we're still like pretty early in terms of like looking at the longitudinal data after COVID, right? So we're in this now entering our second year, our first year and a half.
Somehow.
I think we're still yet to see like the true effects of like what long COVID is going to be. I know there's a lot of people who still have, obviously, like if you've had strokes because you're in the hypercoagulable state because you were sick with COVID, like that comes with years and years and years of like physical therapy, like nursing care.
Think about having residual weakness on one side, or like having speech issues, or I mean, there's so many things. Like a stroke is a very broad term. It's like cancer. You can't put it into one box. It's very broad. It could be a lot of different things. But yeah.
But I think we're not going to see the true cost, the true cost of COVID for many, many more years, and there will be lots of more studies on it. But I think the effect of the system that Fidel is describing, right, this like for-profit healthcare system where all of our interactions with the medical system is mediated by this middleman who only exists to basically make money off of your health, is like incredibly alienating. Like even just like thinking about the experience of going to the doctor, right? Like you don't talk to your doctor first, you talk to the front desk first, and then they ask you for your credit card because you have a copay. That's even before like a single fucking word is said to your doctor. And then you go see your doctor and they might be nice, they might be good, they might be terrible, whatever. They give you a prescription, and at every single point in the healthcare system, it's like every interaction costs you something. So people have this feeling that like, oh, like the system only exists to make money off of me, which is true. Doesn't mean that it doesn't do good. But we're starting off with this like profound alienation from a system that should be a public good. And then and then you wonder like, why are people so distrustful of medicine, of science, of healthcare in general?
And then if I can also add to the distrust of science, medicine. I mean, conspiracy is dangerous, and we see a lot of conspiracy theories around COVID. But scientism can be very dangerous too. You want to talk about the Tuskegee experiments? Allowing people with syphilis to continue to have syphilis, mostly Black Americans, just to
they didn't
kind of
know
see
that they
what
had
happens.
syphilis neither, too, right? Like they wasn't aware that they had syphilis.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't tell them they had syphilis because they were interested to see, oh, let's just see what happens. Like, these are people's lives, but like, whatever, it's more important for science to see what happens, even though this is someone's life. And all of the other kind of shady things that our government has been up to in general. I mean, we have to understand that the distrust of government in the United States is justified. Especially when you're talking about minority groups, the disabled, like undocumented people. We talked about the Tuskegee experiments, Operation Mockingbird, MK Ultra, imperialist aggression over the past century, basically everything the CIA has been up to, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, the complete abandonment by the Democrats of the working class, all of these compounding into this mindset of why should I trust anybody? And then when you get into a doctor's office, like Sigmund is saying, everything is a transaction. Everything is a how much does that cost? Everything is a can I afford that? Can I afford to go to physical therapy after seeing a chronic pain doctor? Can I afford this medication? Can I afford this procedure? And how are you going to trust a medical system where every single decision depends on if you can pay for it or not? I mean, what kind of solidarity does that build? What kind of trust does that build? So we're already starting from behind. Then you want to ask people to trust these same entities who are telling them, get the vaccine, trust science, trust doctors. And people are looking around, why? Why should I? So we have to start from there of understanding people's not really reflexive, like honestly understandable distrust of the medical community. And that's not even talking about the AMA, the American Hospital Association, all of these, interest groups and all this bullshit that purportedly, supposedly is patient-centered, but really is all about maintaining certain people's positions within the medical industrial complex. So we have to start from there to truly understand the scope of what is happening.
Yeah, I would say that I am definitely someone that get mixed up with just trusting big pharma and stuff like that. Especially hearing all this new information that I've been reading about what ivermectin and everything about that. It can get distracting, and I lose my mind just off of that part. It just like I have to remember that like, okay, but these are some trusted positions here, and what is the media saying compared to what actual doctors, actual good physicians that are saying that actually have been giving the best they could do, especially given the circumstances of who can get care or who cannot get care, and what are the results to that. But yeah, the media can literally drive you crazy.
It really can, because it's just like a barrage of information, and all these institutions and groups that we've mentioned, like whether it's the American Medical Association, Hospital Association, or news media organizations, or the CDC, or non-governmental organizations, like they all have competing interests, which sometimes align and sometimes don't, but it's always to their own benefit as an organization and perpetuating itself, right? And sometimes if you're a corporation, that's an interest of profit. And that doesn't always necessarily mean it's completely orthogonally aligned with like making good products. Like we know that like dick pills work, right? Viagra's real. We know that's functional. Like insulin is good. Insulin helps people with diabetes. Chemotherapy like is helpful for treating cancer. So I feel like just like kind of a simplistic analysis of like big pharma bad or like hospital evil isn't necessarily helpful, like in like kind of parsing out just like a barrage of news stories that just like hit you every day. I think like what helps me stay grounded is just like, okay, so looking at like why is it that conspiracy minded thinking like proliferates, and like what is the actual antidote to it? Because like conspiracy theories like they function in a they function to fulfill a psychological need, right? Like if it was just the fact that people didn't know the truth, like we could just liberally debunk our way out of it, but that's not the case. Like otherwise, like Snopes would have moved beyond like the need for existence. Like what's the thing that gives out like three Pinocchios or whatever? It's like
well, the sad part is Snopes can't even be trusted now neither, because they are literally like in bed with these companies, and they have been called out on a lot of things they try to say is factual, and that's sad.
But like but debunking these specific theories, I think, is like not really helpful, because conspiratorial thinking arises from like number one, just like a cognitive bias that people have, and number two, a psychological need in a time of chaos. And we know that like capitalism itself is prone to crises. As we get into late stage capitalism, we're going to see more and more crises. So we're going to see this type of thinking just kind of proliferate, and people like individually need ways to explain what's going on. There's this bias that people are prone to, and everyone is, and it's something called consequence cause matching. So the bigger the consequence or bigger the crisis, like greater the sense of chaos, right, for people, and uncertainty and loss of control. And this is a sense that is just like really upsetting and not fun for just like humans in general. So like there's a greater need to look for a cause, and big events should have big causes is kind of like the heuristic that people go off of. So the worse the outcome, the more likely there are to be conspiracy theories. So like say in COVID, if only a couple thousand people died, only like the fringe people, you know, whose family members might have been affected or whose jobs might have been affected might have a conspiracy theory. But like we had 700,000 people die and counting, right? So like we can only expect to see more of this. So the way that you get out of this, though, isn't to debunk theories or like tell them that they're stupid or like we have to trust science, because like that's not what it's fulfilling. Like these people fundamentally are alienated from their lives and any meaningful sense of control. So like we have to work on actual like building power as like a working class politics, and like taking back control in a meaningful way of our lives rather than seeking it out through like myth making.
That's exactly what I was going to say. What fuels the conspiratorial thinking is the fundamental lack of power that people have in their daily lives, and they're searching for any reason to make sense of the horrors that they are encountering every single day with news media, family, friends saying, "Oh, did you hear this story?" There's so much chaotic energy in the world right now, not just COVID. I mean, you don't even touch on climate change. We haven't even touched on all the zillion things that are wrong with our world, right? So people need to make a sense of it, and a lot of it comes from this sheer fact that the powerlessness that drives this psychology. They need some kind of answer for this, and it leads down. And when you have a fundamental distrust of news media, which again is not always a bad thing, because again, we briefly talked about Operation Mockingbird, and these news media outlets they exist to manufacture our consent, right? Which is what Noam Chomsky talks about a lot. So the only way to get out of this, is not to do the liberal thing, which is to like, hey, read this article and then you'll understand what I'm talking about. The shit doesn't work. And I saw it a lot on Instagram over the past few months about all we have to do is just educate people on the vaccine. No, people have already made up their mind on the vaccine, right? It's not. I'll give a brief example. My friend was talking about Project Veritas. One of my old co-residents. He's talking about Project Veritas, the James O'Keefe, basically like filth propaganda outlet that literally like makes up news stories, cuts video footage to make it look like something that it's not. And I sent him, just as an experiment, I sent him 4 or 5 different articles, like .orgs that are devoted to debunking Project Veritas. And the message he sends back is, Do you really believe this stuff? Do you even read the sources? I'm like, dude, I spent like 30 minutes doing research at least, and you didn't even read any of the articles. People are already convinced when they are predisposed to a certain way of thinking from their fundamental lack of power.
Yeah, and it becomes an issue when you see this, mainstream media, instead of like trying to have a discussion about these vaccines, they're automatically trying to make the people that they can make look like clowns. It was like, oh, he's an idiot, he's dumb, he's doing horse dewormer, all that stuff. Like they're doing everything they can to try to make people that make different decisions look like awful people, but it's like that doesn't help. You don't convince someone by calling someone stupid. Like
that makes them double down.
Yeah, or they also do both things, right? Like they sensationalize like any side effect. They're like, oh my god, like what could be in your water that's killing you? It's like this cognitive dissonance where they're like playing to any sort of sensationalist tactic that'll like sell them views.
Right. And I think that they're doing this because this is we were just talking about conspiracy theories, but this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking the oligarchs had so much fun making money off of Trump, and now that Trump is gone, they're like, fuck, we're losing views. Who could we make fun of now?
I mean, I think they should bring out Biden.
Or Biden or something.
Biden's funny. They got to bring him out more. I mean, whenever they do bring him out once every, couple weeks, he usually does something funny. Like, didn't he just fart in front of some
Duchess of Cambridge or something?
Yeah, I mean,
didn't he fall asleep at like the G7?
Yes,
G7
in front of the Pope or something like. I don't know. I don't know if G7 or what. I thought he fell asleep in front of the Pope. Yeah, dude's hilarious. They got to bring him out more.
My grandma, my grandpa. He can't be leading the country. He's fucking old. Like, you gotta go home and chill and live the rest of his days. Like, but I definitely see that because I have done that before. I've sent research to people about certain things, and they're just like, I don't know, like this headline says blah blah blah. I'm like, damn, bro, you look at the headline and you already like
right. Yeah, people don't, they don't have the time to sit and actually read the article. Not that it would change their mind anyways, right? Because kind of hitting on what Sigmund alluded to a little bit earlier, I don't think there's just two realities. I think there are thousands of different realities that currently exist. And there's this sort of, I don't know, when you talk about philosophy, right? One of the first things you need to do is define terms. And if nobody can agree on it, the initial terms of a discussion, not even a debate, that's for liberals. If you're talking about just a conversation, right, about something, if you can't even agree on the terms to have a discussion, how are you going to have a meaningful discussion, right? If you can't even agree, if you're talking to a conservative, right? If you can't even agree on what capitalism is, what it means, who it serves, if you can't even agree on what communism means, if you can't even agree on basic scientific facts, if you can't even agree on the most basic things, how are you going to get anywhere? And society is rife with this kind of problem, and it depends on largely what demographic you fall into, meaning what kind of news you consume, what kind of social media you use, if you're more likely to use Instagram versus Twitter versus Facebook. It's this kind of stuff, right? That predisposes you to a certain way of thinking. And that is why the reason why nobody can agree on anything is because people are living in 1,000 different realities. So how can we possibly come to an agreement on anything? That is a fundamental problem in the United States, and news media drives that, and it makes a lot of money on that.
Yeah. And not just news media, now with like, as you mentioned, Instagram, as I think people become just more economically precarious, like you have like everyone wants to be an influencer now, right? And sometimes you get that by peddling kind of these inflammatory beliefs, like whether or not you believe it. I think there was like a rash of QAnon influencers who were like basically like failed actors and singers, right? Like you got to make your bag somehow. And I mean, in absence of like a actual working class movement that people can plug into and feel connected to other people and feel like they can actually take control over some part of their lives meaningfully, you kind of can't blame them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, but you see it on Instagram. The influence is just like everything now. It's like, oh, I'm at the gym. Check me out at the gym and stuff. And I mean, I get it. That's cool. It's Instagram, but like,
Well, I think part of that
this
is
is the commodity that they want. This is what this. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think this is largely, again, from the fundamental powerlessness that people experience in the economic sector. Like, there's so much precarity in the world. People are, I mean, debt is basically used as a means of control, especially in the United States at this point. So people have no access to wealth. Most people don't have any access to wealth. They don't own anything but their ability to work. So the only thing they can really do, the only capital they can build, they have no shot at economic capital. So they go on Instagram, they go on Twitter, they try to get the cultural capital, the social capital, right? That's the only means they have of exerting any influence or potentially any power. So I get why the rise in, the influencer thing. I understand why it's there. It's, again, and I don't want this to be the locus of my entire analysis, but a lot of it does stem from a complete lack of power, complete. And how do you put power back in the hands of people? It's not through, elevating the voices of people on Instagram. It's not through, those kinds of things. It's the way you do it is to put power back in people's hands at the workplace, put power in the people's hands where they live, in their communities, right? And that's maybe a bigger conversation, but the rise in the influencer thing, I think, makes a lot of sense from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, they're always talking about what other ways can we continue to like make money, but they put it in a nice little glamorous, glamorous package. But I see it as, how else can we survive? We lost this, economy shot. There's no more middle class. What else can we do to survive? How can we survive? What do we have in our hands that can make us do these the things about unreasonable tasks just to survive in this world, in this country, basically? And this is all we know. We don't know how other countries run. I mean, I freaked out when I heard that other countries was giving people a check every 2 weeks, and I'm just like, y'all call yourselves the richest country in this world, but you can't give your own people a check every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But Jordan can do it, and Jordan's GDP is way different than ours.
Yeah. I mean, they did it in Canada. It was insufficient, but like my mom got laid off and she got a relief check. And I think like for what a more coherent COVID response looks like we can look to other countries, right? Like we can look to the shining star, Cuba. I mean, they have
we always defend Cuba on this podcast.
Absolutely, Cuba stan. And they have a vaccination rate that's like I think almost 75%. Like they're reaching kind of like the highest levels in like the most vaccinated states here. Certainly surpassing us nationally. And they're a country that's been like basically blockaded by the US, right? Just cut off from the rest of the trade.
The doctor on here earlier said that, oh, well, they're a poor country, so whatever they're doing is probably not right.
baby brain understanding of, sorry, go ahead.
No, the Cuban medical system is, I think, like something worthy of admiration, no matter how fucking rich you are in this country. Like they will educate you for free. And I think I really love like their example of healthcare, where they have primary care doctors and nurses embedded into the community. And there was a quote that I read from a news article that said, like, if you miss your annual, your doctor will come and find you. Like there's this like kind of deep integration of like medicine into the community, where this is like not only, just a privilege or something that you have to pay for, but it's like your God-given right as a citizen of this country, and they're going to take care of you. And they haven't needed to implement a mandate because like there is a widespread epistemic trust in the doctors, in the science, like in the healthcare system of that country, because they are like their situation is completely different to capital, right? Like whereas in America, like all of our healthcare, medical, and science structures, even the public ones, like have to have some relationship to capital or are used by capital, like say in big pharma, like pharmaceutical companies use tons and tons of research that is funded by the public to develop like products and medications that they ultimately get all the profit for. Like all the profit is like privatized. So if you remove that sense of like profiteering, then like your relationship to medicine and healthcare can look completely different, where you do trust your doctor because the first thing your doctor's office asks isn't, can you pay $40 right now? It's just, oh, like, do you want to see your doctor? Do you have a problem?
Yeah, and they are also being recognized by a lot of people nationally. Even in Massachusetts, there are care providers that are petitioning to let them come over so they can like talk about what type of healthcare that how they're doing it and what is wrong, what is bad. They've been trying to petition to get Biden to allow that for about 2 years now, and he hasn't really said anything about it. But the fact that even people in a different system are now reaching out to Cubans on their health care. And I just think it's so hilarious that people who are not that are still thinking that Cuba doesn't have a good healthcare system. Like it's like, where is the disconnect? Where are you getting this information from? But then again, CNN, like we were saying earlier, like it's easy to just critique what the news article says, but people will literally watch a segment on CNN for 20 minutes and then act like they're really informed.
Yep.
And you can't do that. And that just means they still have the power, even though we could just keep talking about how bad Western media is. They still have the power, and people are still at second nature going to believe majority of what they are saying, in contrast to challenging it.
Yeah, and all of this is under like severe economic blockade and sanctions. Like it's actually incredible what Cuba's been able to do despite how we've been handcuffing them for decades, right? From that perspective. And they've been sending doctors overseas. I remember when COVID was really bad in Italy, like when it was first starting in the West, they were sending doctors to Italy into the intensive care units to help out. And they don't ask for anything in return. They don't ask for, a loan with 4% interest. They don't do shit like that. they participate in healthcare because they're committed to. Yeah, they do it because they're committed to healthcare. They don't do things. The way the United States works in a nutshell is if anything's going to get done, somebody has to make money off of it. And Cuba does not operate on those same premises. If I can just go over the CARES Act real quick, we're talking about kind of the response in the U.S. real quick. I wrote down a couple things from the CARES Act from last year. So what this was is basically what it was presented in the news, at least, was, for regular people, quote unquote, $1,200 per adult, $500 per child for households with income less than $99,000 for single people, less than $198,000 for couples. And I'm oversimplifying, but it's just to illustrate the point. The total kind of money in 2020 that went to these the $1,200 payments, stimulus payments, was about $300 billion in 2020, $292 billion. Now, the flip side of the CARES Act that is not as discussed, but should disgust you, is about $258 billion going to the most well-off people in our society, basically the people who own our society. And I'll briefly tell you what this entails. So starting from the bottom, $11 billion. This went to eliminating these required distributions from retirement accounts. Every year, you have this federally taxable distributions from your 401ks or your Vanguard account or whatever. And basically, this eliminated that requirement. And what this means is the richest people in the world who don't necessarily need to take out their retirement funds didn't have to do that. So it benefited them disproportionately. $5 billion went toward itemized deductions on federal tax. Usually you can't deduct more than like 60% of your adjusted gross income. Now they went to 100%. So that, of course, benefited the most, the richest people in the world. $12 billion went toward corporate interest deductions on federal tax returns from 30% to 50% of earnings before interest, tax, and depreciation and amortization. But that's not even the worst of it. $140 billion went toward these pass-through entities, right? So basically, it allowed the ultra-wealthy people like Trump and Kushner, people like this, right? It allowed them to use paper losses to offset income that was taxed in previous years when tax rates were higher, in order to get refunds based on those old tax rates, right? $140 billion from that. And then another $89 billion from corporate loss treatment. This was very similar to the pass-through entities. Basically, people or corporations could get refunds up to 35% of losses from up to, I believe, about 5 years prior. So basically, this was just them presenting on a silver platter saying, here's all the money back from prior years where the tax, corporate taxes were higher. I mean, you can't get around the fact that this is just a complete handout to the richest freaks alive.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I didn't hear anything about small businesses getting any of that money.
I mean, there was the
Not one thing.
PPP loans, but we know the fiasco in those funds being doled out, going to giant corporations who are not fucking small businesses getting PPP loans. That's another way they benefited, because they own, or they have the ability to hire lawyers and accountants, and regular people don't have access to this stuff to be able to do shit like that. So that was another big boon for them. And there's many other ways that the richest corporations and people were able to basically get a huge handout when people were getting kicked out of their houses, people were dying from a pandemic. The list goes on. So that's the response of the freest country in the world, of the democracy of the United States. That's the response, is handing out $250 billion to people who are richer than God, basically.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Just hearing all those numbers and how majority of it went to corporate America and not to working class people. It automatically just shows what is the priority and how they don't care about the 750,000 people that have lost their lives because of this. If they did care, you would see those numbers shift in the total opposite direction. But just like during the Obama era, when the Wall Street was bailed out, you see the same thing here. The working class does not get bailed out during a pandemic. The working class struggles more during the pandemic, but the corporate America always will be fine. It strikes me. I was listening to this interview about this rapper where DJ Blad, who I have issues with, was talking about how he did not apply for the PPP loans or any of those loans because he knew that his business was going to be safe. But he told people that also have businesses that are doing well like him, they shouldn't do it, but they did it anyway. And he felt bad. So he was trying to tell, if you have a small business, please apply to this. Please. He was giving out information, doing everything he can. But unfortunately, you see what you just said, that didn't really, benefit. Like, how does that even happen?
I mean, the priority
about that.
Exactly. Yes. It's the priorities of the people in Congress is not to help the people that they represent or the people that elect them. It is to funnel money behind the scenes to their richest donors. The political class only exists now for their donors, for the corporate class, right? For the ruling class, the bourge. That is their goal, is to facilitate the continued ownership and continued accumulation of capital into the hands of the 1% of the 1%, basically. And like I kind of mentioned earlier, the Democrats, who used to be a quasi-labor-ish, not really, but quasi-labor party in the post-war period, once the neoliberal turn, the oil crisis, the stagflation issues in the 1970s, once that came about, the Democrats completely abandoned the working class. And the fact that we're still hoping that we can, I don't know, we can't fix him, sweetie. You know what I'm saying? We can't fix the Democrats, all right? They've made their choice, right? Even though we have Bernie Sanders of the world, we have the Ocasio-Cortezes of the world, the Ilhan Omars, the Rashida Tlaibs, wonderful, Jamal Bowman's, excellent. I love that, Cory Bush. But you're not going to change the DNC to get them to care about the working class again. And this is a complete aside that I'm not going to get into any further. But
if you're going to make enemies, Fidel, you're going to make enemies.
I'm fine with that. People need
to know.
Everybody
thinks the squad can change all of the DNC. They really do feel that can happen, Fidel.
I think the only way the squad at this point can make big changes is if all the people I just mentioned, if they at one single turn formed a actual either
new
Labor
party,
Party or
Yeah.
some kind of actual socialist party at the same time. I think that's the only way they could actually make a meaningful change,
Right.
Because I think a third party is the only way that a socialist movement can actually, like, tied to labor unions and things like that. That's the only way that you're actually going to get any movement toward working class power.
I mean, well, to be quick on the subject, I thought that was something that they were actually going to do when I heard about Democratic Justice. No, what is it called? I forgot.
They have
Justice
so many
Democrat.
caucuses now.
Yes, but I find out it's just a caucus, and then the Socialist Democrat, the DSA, they do a lot of good work locally. But it's like they're all still part of the Democratic Party. I just feel like they should separate. If they separate and they show a standard of working power, then we could talk about something here.
Yeah.
But there's another party called the PSL that's fire as hell. So
that's right.
Everybody forget about that.
We love Gloria. Hell yeah.
Let's talk about that.
But I mean, like, that's also why I mean, no matter like how disconnected or connected you are to politics, like I think most people in America understand that like both parties are not on your side, right?
Yeah.
Like there's nothing really affecting your day-to-day lives, like your rent payment, your hourly wage, your retirement, union like activity, whatever. Like none of that's on the table for either party. So like no wonder politics just becomes this like bullshit culture war thing where it's like which bumper sticker you have, or do you love like the thin blue line sticker, or do you want the Punisher one, or then
or
it
the
just
rainbow
kind of
flag,
or the rainbow flag, and
yeah.
it's like the coexist, but it's the coexist with guns, and like like that just becomes your politics, and then it just bleeds out where these things where in like previous generations or maybe in other countries wouldn't be a cultural issue or a political issue. Like vaccinations become a political issue, like as if we didn't all have to get like 10 vaccines just to go to public school.
Right.
Yeah, I hated that. I got my last booster shot late when I was like 15. And
but we all did it though. We all had to do it, and it's good for society because again, when we talk about vaccines, especially the flu vaccine in the past, it's not about you. You're young. You're not going to die from the flu. Wonderful, but your grandma might. Somebody else's 1-year-old might. People who are immunocompromised that you give the flu to. But people again don't think that way. In the United States, the most individualistic country on the planet, people don't think in terms of community because why would they? There is no community in the United States.
Yeah, it's all about individualism in the United States. That's what they want you to do that. So like, let's talk about the trust now. So we already said that Cuba, the reason why they're able to do what they can, the government is trusted by the people. I mean, of course, you'll see some protesters that are like embedded by the CIA that America likes to keep showing and be like, oh, look. They're going against the government.
Nuance.
Yeah. Oh, shut up. Go to Florida and kiss
That's
my
right.
ass. Anyway, that's where y'all at. We gave you a platform. Fidel kicked you out. All right.
That's
sorry.
right.
Goodbye.
Shout out to a king.
The trust that they have, and how can we do a contrast a contrast in comparison between the trust of the Cubans and the trust of the American government, basically?
I mean, if I could state briefly, I mean, homelessness in the United States. Let's talk about that real quick. Before the pandemic, the number I always had in my head was 500,000 people are sleeping out in the street every night. That was before the pandemic, so that's definitely worse now. Sigmund, help me out. What's the homelessness rate in Cuba? 0%. 0%.
And that's quoted by the fucking Vatican as well too. So if y'all really think
trust the Vatican,
yeah.
The Vatican went over there and was like, damn, there's no homeless people. So
it's like actually Cuba, they're doing some shit over here. 0% homelessness in Cuba. I want to say, what was it, 85% home ownership rate?
Yeah.
We don't even approach that. I think we're probably around 40% here.
Like getting lower.
I think lower. Yeah, most people are renting in the United States. Literacy in Cuba is pretty much 100%. I believe it's like 99.8%.
Everybody can read.
Everybody can read. And you talk about countries like Finland, Denmark. They're not socialist countries. They're social democratic countries, but they are introducing into their curriculums how to critically analyze news media sources, how to critically analyze research articles, things like that other countries definitely are not doing, especially the United States. So I'm saying other more progressive countries are doing this kind of thing. Cuba, the medical system. You know how many people have medical debt in Cuba? Zero.
It's crazy. No medical debt. Wow.
Zero. You know how much it costs to go to the doctor? $0. So all of these things compound together. Oh, in Cuba, there's a food stipend for people monthly. It doesn't matter how much you make. You just get a food stipend.
Oh, wow.
It might be a little bit means tested. I don't know the exact number, but in general, most people get a food stipend monthly. Not the case here. So you want to talk about trust? When the government is, or when the polity, whatever, when the people who are representing the working class and the Cuban Revolution, when they are using the resources at hand, despite, again, incredible economic sanctions, when they're using the resources they have to give the working class their basic needs, I would imagine that would engender trust far more than when the United States funnels money into corporate handouts and corporate subsidies and political donors. Basically, that's where our tax money goes. It also goes to funding imperialism, funding forever war, and then the technologies trickle back down to the consumer market maybe 10 years later. I mean, how can you imagine trust can be built when this is the mechanism here? It's just not possible. And then you add on to that social media, news media, where propaganda is the name of the game. Basically, the goal is to keep people confused because that keeps people hopeless. It's a very effective tactic.
And when you can't trust the government, you gotta fight to switch the system. You gotta fight to change the system.
What else can you do?
What's the point?
Republicans are not your friends. The Democrats are not your friends. Big business is not your friend. Who's your friend? Other people who are just as immiserated as you are. Those are your friends. Those are the people you look to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important also to just highlight the fact that just the narrative just keeps switching. And I feel like they just keep switching the narrative because it keeps people engaged. But I'm not talking about the narrative of like just COVID in general. Instead of talking about how many people are without healthcare that have died, and how can we fix that? How many people who lost housing and because of the pandemic, and how can we fix that? These are very simple things that even the media itself can cover that can help give the government an idea what they should be actually doing instead of, just pandering to whatever they want them to do. It's not a coincidence when you see CIA, former CIA officials that are part of CNN, Fox News.
It's disgusting.
It's
like just baffling. But it's just normal, for people to see these people who are formerly in the CIA, formerly in intelligence, just come on these big news media outlets. Like, we should have no trust for these people just from the outset. Why would we trust them? Their goal
people
is
see that.
Yeah,
the people that know, they see that, and they automatically are going to be like, I mean, that's how I am. Like 21st, like,
But unfortunately, a regular person doesn't quite frame information in that way. I mean, people see FBI or CIA, they think, well, it's an American agency, and America is the freest country in the world, so it must be credible. And obviously, like, not. But that is that's how ideology works. Where the law sort of sets up the basic groundwork for what you're supposed to follow. Ideology takes on the rest of it, which is the unspoken sort of laws, right? The norms, the accepted behaviors and psychology, basically, that people will have. And news media and social media sort of shapes that and continues that process.
Right. So last question. So after we already had a beautiful discussion about just distrusting the media and Cuba's the shit and how important it is to I mean, like, are you guys saying, because I heard you mention herd immunity, Sigmund, because you fully understand that everybody's going to get vaccinated at this point, especially with the distrust in the whole So, what do you think the government should do moving forward? What should they do? Now, we all know that they're not going to do this, but what do you guys feel as being doctors and being the shit, and all you do is socialists as well too? What do you think they should do?
I mean, I think if we're gonna talk hypotheticals, right?
Yeah,
Because
let's
like
talk
the government isn't gonna do shit at this point,
Right.
and they've shown itself for the last 2 years. I think what we needed to have done in a functioning society would have been to lock down in the earliest days of the pandemic when we found out, like China did, like to say, you know what, all these small businesses, like, we'll just pay your rent. Everyone's just going to get a check to stay home. If you're a doctor, if you are truly an essential worker, we will, like, you know, you get hazard pay. Everyone else stays home, and we will like lice all the streets every night for the next 2 weeks until we know that like no one else is sick. Like, we should have done that, and
Right.
that would have been at the expense of capital greatly. Like, a lot of, you know, major multinational companies would have suffered. But I think that's what we needed to do. Like, we needed to bail out the people in a huge kind of society-wide way to show that, like, yes, like, this is a serious pandemic and you should take it seriously. And then I think like, even in America, like, people's reactions would have been different.
Right.
Because I feel like there was such a conflicting message where you were being told to stay home and you're being told to you know, wear a mask and wash your hands and blah blah blah, but like, all the businesses are allowed to be open. Like, you just have to get a carry out, and like people are just working, you know, shoulder to shoulder in restaurants, like in the kitchens.
Oh yeah.
And then like, no one's getting any relief. No one's being paid for all this extra dangerous working situations that they're being put into. Like, how are they supposed to take it seriously?
They actually took our bonuses away. I'm just going to add that.
That's
as
fucked
a
up.
hospital worker, I'm kind of pissed about that.
What?
Go ahead, continue.
Oh my god. I did get a little challenge coin from the hospital that I was
I
working.
got that too.
I know. I feel like we gotta like sell it.
Remember the coin that I got from Yale? got a coin too.
It's like, thank you
Incredible.
for, you know, working skeleton crews and seeing like 40% more patients than we ever have. Like, here's a challenge coin. Thanks, dudes.
Can I tell you what my hospital gave? Well, it was our department, the anesthesia department. You know what they gave us?
Yeah.
And they mailed it to us for some reason. The first time they mailed us a Hershey bar, and the second, I don't think I ever told you this, Sigmund. Yeah, and the second time they mailed us a little packet this big of goldfish and a couple of wintergreen mints.
Oh,
wow!
At Duke, they gave out literal rocks to nurses for being.
Oh yeah!
Wow.
Yeah,
it's like rocks. Kindergarten craft class. Mm-hmm. But yeah. I mean, like, all these like bullshit, you know, oh, healthcare heroes work here. Like, instead of that, if we genuinely materially provided for people so that they took it seriously later, I think that would have been the biggest difference for me.
And how do you feel, lastly, because I agree with all that, and it's funny, we're going to wrap this up soon, but when you mentioned China, when they said that when China went on lockdown, everybody like in social media was like, oh, this is authoritarianism is fuck. They're locking people into their homes. Like, do you see any videos of them actually like boarding people into their homes? Like, where are you getting this from, bro? Because a lot of that is false.
Yeah, it's fake. And also, like, China,
fake,
I mean, I have to say, like, there was an NPR interview with like a public health expert, and he was framing this as if it's a bad thing, but like, China didn't have enough widespread transmission to even have the stats to know like how bad it is. Like, that's how intensely good they were at like locking down.
Yeah, you want pictures of what China was up to during the pandemic? Wuhan opened up and had a giant fucking concert like a few months after I think one of the first surges in the United States. So you want to talk about their response? Oh, again, this is what I was talking about earlier. Oh, it's authoritarianism. It's well, who does the authority serve? It served the people, clearly. because COVID is not really a problem in China, at the very least relative to the United States or the West in general.
Right.
They had like one case at Disneyland there, and they literally locked in like 30,000 people and tested them and said you can't leave until the the negative results show up. And they like wiped like just 99% alcohol like the entire place. But I mean, and again, like
at least they're doing something.
That's what it takes.
That's what it takes, exactly. And like here,
it's an inconvenience, but you're still getting your life saved. Like they're testing you and testing everybody, Like,
and how much are we inconvenienced here? But it's just it's just the invisible hand of the market, right? Like it's never in service of the greater good of society, or if it is, it's like kind of sideways or like related to it tangentially. But like ultimately, all the inconveniences here, all the bullshit that we have to live through here, is in service of capital. Like we could live with all these inconveniences, but if it were for like the betterment of society, I think like people would be happier.
Right.
It's like tax money.
How do you guys feel about the healthcare workers that are being let go as we speak, that have already been on the front lines since the beginning? How do you guys feel about that?
Big
like
topic.
They were called heroes and now they're called zeros at the end of the day, basically.
We're only heroes if we do it for free. That's my take on it. Not for free, but you know what I'm saying. Basically for a wage cut, if you think about it. I mean, if you want to bring in the inflation that's been going on since we pumped $4 trillion into the economy, basically from central bank money going into it. This is kind of the scheme. Central bank money, they need to pump it in somehow. They're definitely not going to give it to regular people. We know that because we live in hell and the government does not represent working people. So what the central banks do is they basically either interest-free or even negative interest, give this money out to companies, say, here's some money, do what you will with it. Because we couldn't lower the interest rates anymore, basically, for from the fiscal policy perspective. So what these companies did, instead of using this to I don't know, pay their workers more, make sure that people weren't laid off, or even have it quote unquote trickle down, hate that word, but we'll just use it, rather than it trickle down in any meaningful sense. You know what these companies did? They bought their own stock. Okay, excellent. What a great response. To give the money to these companies. Oh, how do we help society? We'll buy our own stock and have the stock price go up. So this disconnect that people are seeing a ton. How is there so much unemployment? How is there so much precarity and people losing their getting kicked out of their homes? Blah blah blah. And yet the stock market looks incredible. Doesn't make any sense. Well, this is first of all just a perfect illustration of how the economy is not the stock market. First of all. And it's an illustration of how the rich absolutely control almost every aspect of our lives, right? The fact that this money was given from central banks to companies and not the people tells you a lot. And the response of the companies that got this money tells you everything. The response, your question was, what should we have done? Hypothetically, pay people to stay home. It's really as simple as that. You pay people to stay home. You wait for the virus to subside because you're going to have these peaks and valleys. That's just the nature of it. And as we've seen, especially if you're going to take into account that people are suspicious of the vaccine, they're suspicious of the science and blah, 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 then the only thing you can really do if you're not going to do a full-on mandate is to have a functioning a public that says whenever we're having a spike, we shut down. Okay. And we pay people to stay home. And you do that indefinitely until you get to a rate of herd immunity that's acceptable, that you think is acceptable, and you follow the numbers. This kind of static
goes down a little bit, but now they just don't care. Connecticut was doing that, but now they just don't care.
Some places were doing that, but on a national level, wholly inadequate, and it's a very static response. We're going to do this and see what happens. No, it should have been on a rolling basis. As we see cases rise, we pay people to stay home, watch the numbers come down, reopen. It's really as simple as that. That's a much that's a response that makes a lot more sense than to pump trillions of dollars into companies that just buy their own stock, and to hold up these zombie companies to bail out fucking Boeing, to bail out fucking the what do you call it, the cruise line industry, to bail out all of these industries that honestly don't need to exist or should be nationalized, frankly.
But I think you were getting to kind of the healthcare workers who refuse to be vaccinated and
Oh
they're
yeah,
being so. I mean, I think the question is the same for like anybody who's made like I think if you're a healthcare worker and you've seen like the damage that COVID has done and how sick people get, and if you are a healthcare worker, like you've already had all of your shots and you have to have your flu shot every year. And it's not just for your protection, it's also for like your patients that you're working with and maybe even more importantly like your coworkers. Like before we had the vaccine, like there were outbreaks in the hospital like of people not having adequate like space to spread out when we're having lunch or when we're documenting. Like one person
Mhm.
gets sick and then like 10 people who were in the room with them like now have to quarantine and they can't go to work.
You're at the mercy of people who may or may not be taking it seriously. You just have to hope
Yes.
they are.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Mhm.
And so while I understand how horribly these healthcare workers have been treated, not just in the last 2 years, but like pretty much the entire time in the medical system in the US,
Mhm.
um, I think you have to kind of step back and see this as like a safety thing just for you and your coworkers and your patients and no longer a political thing. Um, but I feel like that's really, really hard in absence of any other changes in the system.
It's not about you. I'll say it again. Vaccination truly is not about you. If you're worried about the side effects of the vaccine, sure, I was too. But guess what? I did it anyways because I was
Yeah,
actually more
yeah,
afraid
I
of
get
the
it.
virus. And guess what? We live in society also. So I'm a little bit worried about if I gave it to my dad. I was a little worried if I gave it to my grandma or your kid. I mean,
Mhm.
again, when you live in a place where there is no community, where there is no trust, where there is no solidarity, why should you care about anybody but yourself? That is the
Mhm.
mentality that this specific historically contingent culture war has created in the United States, a climate of why should I care about anybody but myself? And that's only further propped up by this individualistic nature of our society.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to address those, I think hospitals should have given like generous sick leave for anyone who did get COVID. They should have given sick leave and time for people to get vaccinated. They should have provided, extra stipends for childcare.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of these things that would have engendered epistemic trust of the workers for like the system that they work for, right? Not just like, here's a fucking needle, otherwise you're getting fired.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
some hospitals truly they are running a tight ship. Community hospitals, rural hospitals, they are constantly at risk of. And again, this is the problem when healthcare is for profit. This shouldn't be a fucking consideration that hospitals might go broke, go out of business.
Yeah,
You
that's
live in some
crazy.
rural place that's 2 hours away from an academic center, but then your hospital goes broke. How the fuck does that make sense? Either way,
Yeah, your
um,
hospital going broke.
it's so stupid. It's
It's
unconscionable.
insane.
It's insane. But the reality is that these hospitals, a lot of them, again, especially in rural places, are sort of on the margins, and they are either in the black or in the red. So they didn't have the money to give to healthcare workers. But when you're talking about the giant conglomerates, the regional powerhouses that are making 20, 30 billion dollars in profit a year, and it's just, oh, we just don't have the funds to give to our fucking heroes, quote unquote. If you think we're heroes, put your money where your mouth is, right?
Right, right.
But no, very few places were actually doing that. Or they're saying, oh, we're going to do 2% pay raises over whatever this amount of time. Well,
Less
when
than
inflation
inflation.
is 6 to 8%, that's a pay cut. I'm sorry,
Right.
that's bait. The people who think they know the economy, that's the reality.
Yeah, they're saying everybody's getting 4%. I'm just like, all right, thank you.
Okay, so a 2% pay cut.
4%.
Got
Right.
it.
Thank you very much. Exactly. And part of that is the historical loss in productivity in the sort of industry, right? And sort of like the production center as opposed to finance. Again, a
Mhm.
totally different conversation. But finance capital is doing extremely well right now. Industrial capital growth has been stagnating for, again, the past 40, 50 years since the neoliberal period. It makes sense from that perspective and that progression. So some of the biggest hospitals are doing well. Absolutely no excuse to not pay your alleged heroes, but other hospitals actually are on the on the margins and are at risk of bankruptcy. And guess what? Those giant hospitals are waiting for that to happen so they can buy them out. So this is a giant conversation, and I feel like I'm all over the place, but
No, you're good.
that's my take.
Oh, right. Thank you so much, Sigmund and Fidel, for coming on and talking about the COVID and the working class issues and stuff like that. There's so much more that we can talk about. So I would love to have y'all back on another time and stuff. But definitely, everybody that's listening, check out their podcast. Look, I did it again and put it right behind again. Jesus Christ, Jamar.
This is fancy. This is a whole production.
Very fancy.
Marxistandmedicine.com. This I'm gonna tell you right now, the way things is going. Oh God, I did it again. Jesus. The way things is going, video, algorithm wise, this video probably is going to get put on notice on Facebook and YouTube and stuff like that. But Spotify has always did great for me in Anchor stuff like that. So definitely check. I'm gonna send you guys a link on the audio, and then I'll try to do the video and see how that goes for the first 2 weeks. But probably is not gonna happen.
That's okay. We were made for radio, I feel like.
That's right.
They're
Yeah,
like,
I have a face only mom can love. So.
They're talking about Cuba. Oh, we're gonna have to monetize this shit.
We would love to come back and sing praises for the Cuban medical system.
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it should at this point just be like the actual fact instead of just all the like. I hate just the whole concept of poor country. Why is the country poor? Because their resources are being exploited, or because they are going through some type of sanctions, embargo, all that stuff. So if humans are making this country poor, the country is never poor. They're making it poor because they want what is there and they're exploiting it. That's what it is. Like
that's a Michael Parenti original, I think. These quote third world countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited.
Yeah, exactly. That you just Michael Parenti did say that. I love that guy. I wish I could talk to him.
Yeah, shout out.
All right, well, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much, comrades, for coming on, and have a very, very good day. Let's stay in touch. Nice to meet you, Fidel.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thanks for having us. It was fun.
See you guys later.
Take care.
Collectively transforming community, peace in our human family, volume of unity, divine light shining individually, collectively transforming community, peace in our human family.
One love, one growth, as above, so below. Feel the pain in my soul, the red pill dissolved. Organized, no matter the cost. Politicians start wars, they don't fight, they sit in the poor. And nothing lasts forever as long as we stay together. Give hell to the masses, watch the unity rapture. This is for the kids and the culture. It's one love, one growth, one